This is Clobbered. My name's Mark Webster. His name is Mark Baxter. Mr. Baxter, come on, join in. What's going on here?
Today we're going back to the 90s. Did
we ever leave?
Arena magazine from 1997, and today our guest is Sir David Rosen, commercial estate agent,
London's most creative.
Absolutely, without a shadow of a doubt, who wrote an article for the Arena magazine, which I have here, in 1997 about Saturday boys in shops, which have become very, very famous in their own right.
Dave, I love this. When Saturday comes, great title. The article's tremendous because it is a kind of real timeline affair, and let's delve deeper into that now. But let's start where we all are going in our head. Was you a Saturday boy anywhere?
Yeah. My first Saturday job was up at the Ivy shop in Richmond.
Oh, well.
Where else?
Okay. And then, very quickly, I found out that I didn't have to go all the way over to Richmond, and that they had the Brewer Street shop, the Squire shop.
Yes.
Which was only 5 stops on the Bakerloo line from Maida Vale.
So what always surprised me about the Richmond part of this equation with the whole John Simon story is that, I know Richmond very well, and quite leafy and wealthy it is. But did people travel from everywhere because that shop was there?
Yeah, but before that, what you've got to remember is the Crawdaddy was there where the Stones used to play, right? So really it was on the map because of the Stones.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was the thing.
Yeah.
Well, John was spending time there socially when he could be cafes and pubs and bars.
Yeah, it was also, coming from the East End, him and Jeff Quintner, his former partner, they were looking for a cheap site. There ain't no bones about it. And Richmond, they just went all the way over from one side of London to the other because it was a nice shop.
Yeah. Let's be honest.
Good
looking for a cheap site in Richmond now. Yeah. Don't try it, kids. It's not going to happen. Although, strangely enough, my kids went over there the other day, and you can go shopping in the Ted Lasso shop and buy Richmond FC cover, which is for a football team that doesn't exist in the comedy series, which isn't very funny. That's not fair. So, did you do Saturday Boy?
Yeah, I pulled a few stalls out in the market. 15, 16, basically East Lane Market, East Street Market, local one in Walworth, Elephant Castle area. Just putting the stalls out and put them back in again at the end of the working day. Not very exciting, but a few bob, cash in hand.
Yeah, I did worked at Ashford Market down in Kent Saturdays. Ladies' clothing. Which was obviously an interesting for a 14, 15-year-old boy. Handing tops into the back of a van, which was obviously the changing room for the purposes of that. But most excitingly, they had one of them donut stalls on the market with the little round baking hot ones that used to go around and just dip and fall in the grease.
There's a special taste to those guys.
I mean, my body is my donut temple. You know,
I could eat one.
I could eat more than one right now. Right.
Yes.
Where does this start then? Because obviously, I'm going to guess the simple principle here is there's been a lot of fellas a bit like us who took advantage of that one day a week work and then turned it into pretty much everything we know fashion wise.
Yeah, I mean all of them. If you look at the family tree, if you like,
very nicely portrayed,
which we will obviously show.
Yeah. I mean it starts really. I guess it starts with Johnny Simons, who used to dress the windows at Austin's on Shaftesbury Avenue, where you had Ceil G and everything else. So really, you go back to come forward.
So why was Austin so important? What is the
first shop?
It's a fabled shop for most of us.
It was before my time, but it was the first shop in London that really was doing American clobber.
Oh, right.
For the jazzers. Right, it's Archer Street.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You look at Phil Seaman, you look at Tony Ainsley, you look at all those, Ronnie Scott. Look at all of them, and really what they're doing, Blue Note.
So that's the influence. The jazz album covers they've been picking up. That's the influence.
And the musicians coming out of New York.
Yeah, of course, yeah.
Right. But it's kind of one-stop shop then, which of course, this is half a lifetime ago we're talking, isn't it?
For sure.
Literally half a century. Yeah. So I suppose it's not really surprising that it's got to start with one shop before it then blossoms.
Yeah, I mean, listen, originally everything was just about one shop, one restaurant.
Yeah.
There weren't chains of
No.
anything other than Woolworths and a Wimpy bar. I mean, Millets, right, if you wanted Levi's, right, and a Sky Jump Harrington. There was no Barracuda, we didn't even know what it was.
Vaguely glorious memories of minutes, just for their drill carpenter trousers.
I just thought when I was
looked American.
Charlie Watts was a big Austin's man.
Yeah, of course.
Because he really did.
Well, Charlie, because he was picking up on the American vibe.
Yeah.
Right, he was a jazzer.
Yeah.
Before he was rock and roll.
I remember speaking to John Egerty for the John Simons film he made.
Sure.
And he said that Austin's was just not a jumble, but it was pretty disorganised in there. And that's what John himself did when he went in there. He started to almost...
Yeah, but John sorted it out a bit for them.
And that's what it
Lou
all
Austin
started from,
was more of an entrepreneur. I think he was a musician or something.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so he wasn't, he's not an old-fashioned rag trade guy.
Lou Austin was someone that knew what he was up to. And then don't forget you had, Dobell's.
Right.
The jazz shop. Yeah, it was all on Shaftesbury Avenue.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Everything was happening. Shaftesbury Avenue was our street.
Yeah.
Well, it wasn't Carnaby Street or King's Road.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good.
Obviously pre-order, isn't it? Yeah.
And of course,
Totally.
you see this down the line. I know the Davies St George is referenced here. Obviously, we've talked about it a lot. Very similar situation with the guys not coming from a traditional background, but just having the eye and the capacity to put it all together. Ceil G's a name that interests me, based on the fact that that's probably one of the first names I'm thinking of in terms of branches. It is one bloke at some point, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it was a family, Ceil G and his brothers and everything. But Ceil G was the first to have more than one shop.
Right.
Okay, he may have had one in North London, may have had one in East London, but it definitely had the flagship in the West End.
Yeah.
Right, and the reason why we all know it is because of John Lennon's suede jacket on the front of Rubber Soul.
There we are.
That's it. That's the thing.
I think it's the first posh shop name that I think I know.
Well,
I remember it from
it says here sophisticated.
Yeah.
Sophisticated is today's equivalent of stylish, you know what I mean?
Or grown up, actually.
I
as
agree.
well.
It would have been a shop, like the destination shop.
You look at the front of Rubber Soul and what they're all wearing, particularly Lennon. They love Ceil G, those four.
Okay.
Right, the Fabs were in there buying whatever they could get their hands on.
Do you know what's happened there? Which is the way they should always be. It's the working class boys have got their hands on a little bit of cash, and what else are they going to do?
I was with Elmslie the other day. It's the same story.
Yeah.
Working class boys with a few quid now.
Yeah.
So we can all afford Barracuda rather than the knockoff Sky Jumps for millions.
Yeah, which of course goes back to the kind of the contemporary Burberry conversation, in which all of a sudden Burberry going, I don't think we have on with this big shop anymore. All of a sudden, 3/4 of Romper turns up.
Yeah.
There's nothing on their shelves anymore.
Yeah.
Hopefully, most of it got bought, and then they decided they didn't want that kind of trade.
This man, not that long ago, hit 60. What's he got?
That's nice.
Alden.
Right?
Alden,
Yeah.
not Loke. And before Loke, it was Timpson.
I didn't get a cake, I got a pair of shoes.
Yeah.
Nice.
Very
With
nice.
a candle.
No, very nice shoes.
In each one,
Yeah.
I don't know.
No, very nice shoes.
Paul bought in the right one, I bought in the left one. Right? Or was it the other way round these days?
Yeah, good friends of mine bought me a very nice pair of Alden
Well,
shoes.
I-
Very nice.
Yeah, because he's a lovely bloke.
The good news is that you text each other to make sure one got the left and one got the right.
Yeah.
I'm not allowed to wear them though. I'm not allowed to wear them out.
No.
Because obviously there's a very pre-conditions with the shoe. If it's raining, you can't wear them.
This is true.
You can't wear
If
them.
it's dry, you can't wear them.
If it's too hot and sunny.
If there's a bit of a gradient.
It was quite a moment there. Here's your shoes, but you can't wear them.
Yeah.
Jumping along.
You can wear them.
Yeah.
Weddings, bar mitzvahs and christenings.
Quite right.
Okay, there you go.
Best.
And if you get lucky, all three on the same day. So, you get your money's worth out, which is great. I want to go to the shop. I think that probably I looked at again in a similar way when I was a bit older, thinking, one day that's mine, and Woodhouse. Now, you reference Woodhouse in this article. How do we get to Woodhouse in your Saturday Boy story?
Okay, so Woodhouse, but before Woodhouse, what you've got to remember is there was Quincy.
Right, okay.
Okay, on Brewer Street and then the King's Road as well. So, John Simon's the godfather, and then on one hand he's got Stuart Malloy, sadly passed away recently, and on the other hand he's got Philip Stark, who's Fabulous.
Working in the shop,
Yeah, they were his managers.
Right.
Right. Stuart leaves to set up Quincy, and Philip then leaves to set up Woodhouse. And that's really what it is. But they both
70s? Would that be?
80s.
Oh, it's a little bit later.
It's,
right?
yeah, I think Quincy was in the 70s. You know, it was coming in off the suede head thing.
Yeah,
Right.
Quincy's a big name.
I mean,
don't
Quincy
remember it at all,
was
but I've heard it
really
mentioned.
big. And then it evolved into Jones, which became massive.
Quincy Jones.
Quincy Jones, get it?
No.
Yeah.
Not a coincidence.
So Stuart Malloy
brilliant.
was Quincy, and then he was Jones. He had John Shaporis with him, and Peter Siddell, who's the library on Fulham Road.
Good lord.
So he had his two.
It all rolls on, yeah.
Yeah.
That makes sense that Woodhouse was the 80s actually, because
Yeah, totally.
we're already shopping
Yeah.
quite heavily at this stage, and
Yeah.
then Woodhouse feels a little bit more like the high-end version of what we're trying to buy.
It is. It's more. I think King's Road. I don't know. I just think King's Road.
No, you're right. Yeah.
That's what
But the importance of Stuart Malloy and Philip Stark can never be underestimated, coming out of the John Simons school.
Right.
Right.
And just with the little twist that they're doing, it's more contemporary. The one that I would therefore put before, only because I know full well when I went there and bought it, or again walked past it and think one day, Stanley Adams on the King's Road. Stanley Adams.
No, Stanley Adams on Kingley Street.
Oh no,
That's the start.
That's where it started, right? Okay,
Yeah,
so
Kingley Street.
So Stanley Adams on the King's Road.
Actually around the corner from
yeah,
there.
Literally around the corner.
So it started for me on there, and this was when, and I know that you'll both remember this well, because this is where I got my one. It was when the only colour shirt you could buy, if you were a soul boy, was that burgundy wine colour. For some reason, all shirts had to be that colour.
Yeah.
The best ones were boys who had them with a penny drop collar.
Yeah.
Mine was a short sleeve one, but it was the right colour, and it was Stanley Adams on the King's Road who provided it. And Stanley Adams did become very destination for the soul boy crowd.
Yeah.
Stanley Adams was incredibly important when you were moving just to a kind of slightly longer head version of a suede head.
Right.
You were growing up a bit. Right. My first job in the West End, my first whistle, Stanley Adams. Right. So you were making this graduation from the Ivy shop, the Squire shop, Quincy, and then as you get a little bit older, a little bit more sophisticated, you go to Stanley Adams.
Yeah.
And it was special. The clobber they had in there was fantastic.
Yeah, I don't remember that shop.
Right. And I tell you who's good. You know who you should talk to next? Jeff Dean. He knows all this stuff.
Jeff Dean, yeah.
Yeah. And there was Carvella, also on Brewer Street, which was just a moment.
So who was Stanley, again, in our family tree, where does Stanley Adams emerge out of?
He just emerges.
Oh, does it?
Yeah. Right.
Oh, okay.
That Stanley Adams just appears, like you have all these names that are cults, and then all of a sudden there's just Stanley Adams.
Yeah.
Right. There wasn't a Philip Stark. There wasn't a Stuart Malloy coming out of somewhere. He's just there.
I wonder if there's actually a Stanley Adams.
Well, that's the question.
We must find
right?
out.
No one ever knew. It's like Harold Tillman with mythology, right? Because you go into the Squire shop on Brewer Street and you'd see that all the sports jackets and blazers, it would say expressly made for the Squire shop by Harold Tillman, and all the kids would go, "Who's Harold Tillman?" Well, he's a legend, Harold.
He's a real
He's
man,
an
isn't he?
absolute legend.
He's a real man.
Well, he's around, and he's
I
still.
like that.
He's great.
Can I throw one in the mix here? It's not here. Take Six.
Yes.
I
Take
don't know much about
Six.
Take Six, but we love Take. I
Well,
love
Take Six, Lord John. That
that
was
more
the
High
other
Street?
thing,
More High Street?
in a sense. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, it was certainly more value. Should we go with that?
It was
No,
quite,
it was less mod. It was less mod, less suede
was more
head.
80s, yeah.
Well, it was
Soul.
70s into 80s.
Yeah.
And it was a slightly more eclectic thing.
Yeah.
It wasn't as focused as what we've just been talking about.
yeah.
And I might be doing
It's popular. Popular.
No,
Yes.
I bought a lovely suede
Yeah.
blues on, which I was very, very proud of. Very
I
proud of.
got from there, and again, it is definitely sold by well. So now we're in the probably early mid '80s. I bought again, which was a big deal then. It was in the right kind of cotton, and it was the very thin pinstripe, almost like your needle cord style, blue and white, but which looked like an American prison shirt.
Okay, yeah.
And
Yeah,
that was
yeah.
the kind of look, and it fitted loosely like that. But three of the buttons fell off. Just fell off.
Hang on. Didn't you have to pay extra for the buttons?
Oh, really? Yeah, exactly. That's right, yeah.
More to the point.
I had to go back every Saturday.
Yeah.
Give
Another button as well.
Yeah. Button.
Bit the button. But I think, and I hope I'm not doing a disservice, but it's fundamentally part of the story. Eddie Prendergast, who we've talked about, is called one of the great Dover founders. Jazzy B from Soul to Soul only ever calls him Trendy.
Right.
That's his
Yeah, that was his
because he used to be
nickname.
called Trendy Eddie.
Yeah.
And I think it was take 6, which is where he cut his, he cut his teeth.
Okay.
Yeah, that makes
Probably
sense.
in a kind of Saturday boy way again.
Yeah, it was well
as
shot
well.
for a lot of people.
I mean, there is. Look, you've got your different generations.
Yeah.
You've got John Hegarty, John
Yeah.
Simons.
Yeah.
Then there's Stuart Malloy and Philip. And then, you got to remember, that period, 69 to 71, I'm 14, 15.
Yeah.
Right? There is an age difference between us three.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So if you're hitting those shops, it's because, in a sense, how old were you when you were going into those shops?
Okay, well, so my first trek was the King's Road.
Exactly.
And I'm 16 probably.
That's right.
And uncomfortable and embarrassed about even going through the door.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'll work walking in something.
Yeah.
Give it
for
a
sure.
year,
Yeah.
you think you own the gaps.
That's
too,
right.
But there's
So
enormous jumps. isn't
You're
there?
hitting the King's Road in the way my lot, we all hit the West End.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Because the King's Road was Granny Takes a Trip, and it was actually a bit, between the buttons, Rolling Stones. It was actually a bit flouncy.
Yeah, and flary.
And until Quincy opened and Jones opened, and then you had the Village Gate. until those boys started down the King's Road, that brought back in the whole mod sport.
Do you know what? I'm glad you said that. I was about to say one of the threads, obviously the massive pun, is that a lot of what we're talking about here is there's not a lot of quantum leaping in the looks. It's development of a very similar style, isn't it?
Yeah.
The shops you're talking about.
Yeah, but that's the point. When Quincy and Village Gate and Woodhouse came to the King's Road, it brought back how we look today.
Yeah.
Because it was going off. It was going a bit flower power and a bit, posh hippie.
Or indeed, of course, that soul boy thing of 20th century box down the King's Road, Americana stuff, second-hand kit, and then that was the other road.
Well, that's when you had Meanies and you had American classics down the far, actually towards the World's End.
Yes, correct.
I remember it well. An important thing you've got to remember about all of this stuff was when you went and bought your gear on a clobber, right? That's another story.
We do that podcast tomorrow.
That's another era, right? But you would then go off to football if you weren't working, right? It's very important. I mean, the only person I know that gets dressed up to go to football, apart from me, is Bob Elms. Right? It was really important. You never turned up in trackies and a sweatshirt or anything. You wore your clothes.
I have to say, there's a guy called old DJ, pal of mine called Neil Atkins. To this day, every West Ham game, it's still a Mac. It's still slacks. It's still loafers.
Yeah.
And we talked about this before. I always used to kind of work on the because I used to, Upton Park evening games. Everyone looked like they just turned up from Liverpool Street, all come out of the offices and gone straight there, which is probably true. Yeah. But I also think they genuinely were dressing up.
Yeah, one or two definitely.
Yeah, I mean, you cannot go to football
that has disappeared.
Looking like a scruff.
That has disappeared.
Yeah, because everyone.
Heaven forfend.
Right.
It has disappeared.
I mean, it's
fair.
like
it's become so murchy and
it's just
more casual.
I think the last time
casual.
it had its thing was on the terraces with Stone Island. And Burberry.
Which is having it again, of course. In big
my 14-year-old goddaughter the other day come out and said Stone Island at 14.
Fine.
I mean,
I mean, we all know what the references are.
Right again.
It's great. It's great to see a bit of that.
And which brings us beautifully to relatively like the kind of contemporary version of this era, because it's going to be names that we all know because it's become very commercial. That's Browns, which is obviously referencing, probably because it was a one-off, but everyone knew it. But then you go Hackit and Ted Baker, two names again that are referenced in here. Again, do you remember which guys would have led to which part of that? Can you remember?
Okay, so Ashley Lloyd Jennings and who's sadly also no longer with us, but Jerry Hackett, they started in the New King's Road. They had a place called Hackett's or Ashley Lloyd Jennings or something. It was an amalgam of their names, I think. And they were doing really interesting shoes.
Oh, right.
And then they were doing really good second-hand clothing in the 80s, like quality stuff.
That's what I remember that.
It's like, instead of it being second-hand, it was pre-owned.
Yeah.
The posh version.
We crossed the great divide.
Yeah.
It's a very vintage one to start.
Vintage. But today you'd call it pre-owned.
Yes.
Right, you know.
But
And
good quality stuff, really good quality.
really selective.
Yeah, curated.
There you go. Another one.
There's the word.
Another fancy word.
Yeah.
I mean, it's true. That's the difference between a lot of it. Anyway, there's loads of stuff, but actually getting the good stuff and putting it in the shop, you're curating it.
Curated, pre-owned.
Yeah.
You could be in the rag trade game, Mark.
I'm a little guy.
I'd love to be the fun, the thrill of the chase. If your job was just go out there and find some really
stuff.
good bits, God, that would have been like, you'd never see me again.
But what was the
a
American
life.
guy who had that place where you could get all the denims and everything? Flip. Yeah, that was an interesting moment.
Yes.
Like Flip.
Yeah, Flip was
We like
great.
Flip.
The Westway Covent Garden for me.
Yeah.
Took off as a space.
Yeah. Well, don't forget, once again, before flipping Covent Garden, Johnny Simons had moved out of the West End.
Yes.
He'd moved over to Russell Street.
Yeah.
Which became a massive mecca. You speak to Suggs about that.
Oh,
you know.
yeah, Covent Garden. That's.
Oh my God.
Covent Garden is literally going to be a whole other story.
I think
we've got one coming.
you know,
Yeah.
I mean, Jones on Floral Street.
Yeah. Well,
Obviously,
Paul
Smith.
Is Brown's the shop that makes South Molton Street? And at this stage, I should point out, of course, it's a very London-centric conversation, I realise, but I think we all know as well that it was a shopping mecca. People know these names because they came, they travelled and they bought. But Brown's for me is how I know South Molton Street.
100% right.
Oh, yeah.
100%. I remember going there in the early 70s with Belinda from Wembley.
We'll leave it there, Dave.
And yet another
She took me.
Nice photo of Belinda.
Hang on. She took me into Brown's, and like I couldn't believe it. And there were shoes by this guy, and they were called Zabata. And you know who Zabata was?
Yeah.
Manolo Blahnik. The rest is history.
I've heard that from the Soho thing. Zabata.
I've actually got. I've still got an original pair of Zabata correspondence.
Yeah, slightly different way of saying it.
Like Chapato.
Yeah. No, the guy got to sit with Millwall, big old soul boy. Steve.
Yeah.
Hello, Steve. And he loved the Zabata.
Well, I never got as far as the shoes too expensive, but the ones that I will give you straight out of the soul boy world, Dangby canvas belts, Browns, ball jeans, the banana cuts, both. You probably had to go to Browns to get them.
Yeah, no, Browns was really important both for men and women, and the men's shop was great. I mean, they had a little resurgence before they sold out, and weirdly enough, they were doing in a kind of Conway. They got hold of Audens and they were doing black smooths, but trying to pass it off as like a Japanese look, which I found very odd, right? Because it was like the ultimate suede pair of lace-ups, wasn't it?
The Japanese market enormous, and if you can tap into the fashion people in Japan, you're flying, aren't you? That's the future.
Totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, the way it goes. Just quickly before we pack up, Richard James's name is writ large in this story as well, isn't it?
Sure.
So where's that part of it?
Well,
come
you
from?
don't forget there was two people doing Savile Row. They, after it'd been a long time since what's his name, the original tailor on Savile Row that was doing the alternates. That made all the big. Tommy Nutter.
Yeah.
Right. So post Tommy Nutter, there was a drop off.
Well, it says here Richard James started in Browns in the 70s.
Correct.
So
That's when I first met him.
Yeah, he's coming out of there, yeah.
And funny enough, Ashley Lloyd Jennings did as well. They were Saturday Boy there.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Right. And the thing with Richard James, and not forgetting one moment, Carlo Brandelli, with what he was doing at Kilgar, was really important.
Well, he come out of squad, didn't he?
Correct.
Squad,
yeah. Well, that was his own thing. Right. But the thing was, you had at one end you had Richard James, and at the other end you had Carlo Brandelli with Kilgar. Really exciting.
New life into the greatest shopping street
in the world
ever in the history of.
He's still known as a newborn. He's been there like 30 years. Isn't he? I've heard him say he's still his newborn.
Yeah.
The old sweats.
Yeah, but I mean, Richard and his business partner, who still runs the gaff today, is Sean Dixon. Right? A bit of an unsung hero.
Yeah.
And we should, because thank you so much for your time, Dave. What a wonderful journey we've been on. But luckily, we've returned to 50 yards from Savile Row, because you're here on Golden Square, and let's be honest, I don't know if it's accidental design that landed you here, but this place has got its own story to tell, wasn't it? Golden Square.
Yeah, Golden Square, when you think of Dorme and everyone else, and what's the other fabric shop?
Vintex in the corner.
Yeah, Vintex, and then the famous one opposite my old office on Savile Row.
But there's the cloth names, yeah?
Yeah.
But this is the thing. This was, although it's a very grand and posh gaff, space nowadays rather, the Golden Square, it was like the tradesman's entrance into the row, wasn't
totally.
it?
Yeah.
Totally. You had to get your fabric here.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right, this was it. This was the epicenter.
Yeah.
Right, you'd come down
Holland
here,
and Sherry.
the very
in
one.
there
Did you just pluck that
It's
from
in there
nowhere?
He did
somewhere.
it. He got
I've got to
there.
get for the mental fire.
Yeah.
What a move.
It's there.
Right.
It's going
Well
straight
done.
around.
So Holland
Never
and
saw that
Sherry
coming. Never saw that
on
coming.
the other side.
Oh,
They were on the other side of the square.
That's right.
Right.
That
So,
makes sense.
you know.
Has he been badged up?
Oh, he will be. I don't think you got one. I think I'll give you a badge, didn't I?
No.
Oh, wait, fair
We
enough.
should. Okay. I might.
You can have his one.
What I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend now that he's having mine, for the purposes of filming,
Yes.
and then he ain't getting nowhere near it. But obviously, we should point out at this stage of the badge career. Obviously, our great long
We got teacups, we got sweatshirts, we got t-shirts,
tote bags,
tote bags. Everyone, tote bags.
all available for you. Please subscribe. It costs you nothing. And now we thank. Wow, what a journey!
Thanks to Dave.
Great.
Beautiful, mate.
Sharing it
Without
with you
having
boys.
to leave the comfort of your own office
Beautiful,
space.
beautiful, mate.
Dave,
Thanks
thank you so
very
much.
Thank
Pleasure,
you.
guys.
Thank you.